I think after we lost John McNulty and Tem Lokabu, most folks were waiting for a new coordinator at each position. Well, folks, you didn't get just two. There are now 4 coordinators on offense and defense. We're going to get into why this may not be the worst thing in the world, and why it's not as bad. Let's just leave it at that. We'll give you some reasons why this isn't the worst hires that BC could have made. This on today's show.
You are Locked On Boston College, your daily podcast on the Boston College Eagles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On BC, I'm your host, AJ Black. Today's episode is about football. We will not be talking about the Georgia Tech loss because there's so much football to talk about. We'll get into the ACC tournament on tomorrow's show. Today, we got to talk about all these new hires. And going into this hiring season, once we knew that Hafley pulled the trigger and got rid of John McNulty, and Tem Lokabu went off to the NFL, you were hoping that there was going to be a couple of hires that would just make you feel like give you the feels again for BC football. Didn't really get that from this. And we'll talk about that with Mitch Wolf, who's here right now. Mitch, how's it going?
It's going well. I'm excited. There's a lot to dig into. We were kind of talking about this before the show, kind of breaking down all the news we had to get into. So let's get into it.
So yeah, I think let's get into it. We're going to start on we're going to go segment by segment. So first segment's going to be the offense, second segment, the defense, and then third segment's everything else. Cause I mean, I could probably do 2 or 3 shows just on Hafley's press conference because there was a lot to dig into. So let's go with the offense. We now have 2 offensive, one of them's officially offensive coordinator. The other is the assistant head coach for offense. And the offensive coordinator is going to be Steve Shimko, who was the quarterback's coach for a while. A name that we had heard floating around. I mean, neither of these hires are really new, but the titles are interesting. And Rob Chudzinski, who had been Jeff Hafley's special assistant, is now the associate head coach for offense. And as Hafley said in his press conference, he's running the offense.
Yeah, I think this is very interesting. I mean, just if you look at this semantically, when you go to the website and look at Chudzinski, it says associate head coach for offense / offensive development. And then Shimko is offensive coordinator / quarterbacks. Additionally, Daryl Wyatt has added pass game coordinator duties in additionally to being the wide receivers coach, which is interesting. So we're splitting a lot of responsibility among 3 guys. It seems like everything's going to kind of go up to Chudzinski. It seems like he's going to be the guy calling the plays, whereas Shimko and Wyatt will be kind of figuring out what the guys do well and what they want to run. And then it's up to Chudzinski to kind of figure out how to distill all that into one cohesive vision and then call the right plays in game, which again, we kind of figure after that football scooper where we kind of knew this was coming. It was just a matter of time. And again, we both, I think, wanted an outside hire originally for the purposes of getting some fresh eyes in this offense. And that's, one way you can go with things. On the other side of the coin, the guys all these guys have been in the building. They know these players really well. They know their strengths. They know their weaknesses. And, I'm very interested to see how this turns out this season.
Now, I think the big question is, I have to look at this in the way that you just broke it down, Mitch. Like I have some severe PTSD with multiple coaches coaching offense after watching what the Patriots just did this year. That being said, Bill Belichick put a special teams coordinator and a defensive coordinator and had both of them running the offense. Completely different, I think. That being said, there's a part of me too that is still worried that there's too many chefs in the kitchen. That for things to work effectively, you want one. I feel like it's most effective when you have one guy that is the guy, and now we have 2 to 3 guys.
Mm-hmm. I still think Chudzinski's the one that's going to be in charge for most of it. I mean, the fact that he has this unique title, associate head coach of the offense, I think that's telling that he is the guy that's going to be in charge of, again, calling the plays and, making up the game plans on a week-to-week basis, which I think is I think that's the right call, but I still like having, these at least. And I think part of it also was I know in Hafley's press conference, he mentioned Shimko getting some NFL calls. So maybe this is one of those things where you throw a coordinator label on him and then he gets a pay bump and that keeps him in house because Hafley wants to keep his guys. And and I like the idea of having the pass game coordinator. I'm intrigued that there isn't a run game coordinator. I wonder if they might tack that onto Applebaum, but given what we saw from that report from, I believe it was Sports Illustrated about his time in Miami, I doubt it. But I'm intrigued to see, again, I think this is a very interesting scheme they've worked up with in terms of who's doing what. I thought Hafley did actually a pretty decently honest job of actually laying out kind of what each guy's responsibilities are in the press conference. He's pretty open about that.
Yep.
And one thing that we talked about, and I think fans will be relatively encouraged by this, is that Hafley was very intense during this press conference. It was very serious.
Yep.
And I think you mentioned it as desperation. I think that you could call it that, but I think it's just he knows that this is time to put up or shut up, that he is essentially coaching for his job this season, and he's taking it very seriously. You can see that he's generally good with the media, but I don't want to say he was terse or curt, but he was all business during that media availability.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that too, and I thought, listening to him, and I think we'll talk more about Hafley's comments in a little bit. I want us to kind of stick with the offense here. One thing I had in my notes that I wanted to bring up was the title of the press release for this, which is BC finalizes 2023 staff ahead of spring season. Consistency in personnel, the key to Hafley's new staff. That's certainly a choice when you just went 3-9.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't want to bash, I work with these folks and I have to rely on them for information sometimes, but I don't know, man. I don't know why you would post that out to a fan base that just watched your team just play like absolute crap for you.
Well, if you think of it this way, you could look at McNulty and Guglielmo as kind of the interlopers that were ejected after that terrible season. Now we've gone back to guys that have been in the house the whole time. You bring Applebaum back. You promote guys who have been there with Hafley. I mean, Wyatt is a relatively new addition, but you're promoting guys who've been with Hafley since he came here. So, I think you could kind of turn that on its head a little bit to make it seem like, oh yeah, we're getting back to our roots. Which again, your roots are 6-6 seasons with mixed results on offense. So, again, there's holes to poke in that argument too. But it is interesting because Hafley did mention that he did look for outside candidates. I don't, he said that. I don't know how, seriously he did that. I don't know how, deep into his Rolodex of coaching networking he did in terms of who he was looking for. But, I think he did explore outside hires, and maybe at the end of the day, he mentioned a lot about how, especially Christian Mahogany and some of the other offensive linemen wanted Applebaum back. And, it kind of makes me think, did he, listen to the players more this time and say like, hey, we like the coaches we have. We want to see them stick around. We don't really want to deal with somebody else coming in. And this is something he mentioned more with the defense, but he didn't want to be bringing somebody else in and trying to, kind of get them up to speed with this team. And maybe for a guy that is, like we think, is kind of on the hot seat going into the season, maybe he was just like, he just thought, I don't want to introduce that variable. We have to get this guy caught up with our guys. Let's just stick with the guys we know. Then we don't have to have this adjustment period where these guys have to learn how this guy coaches this coach has to learn how these guys have to be coached. So, I see the point. We'll see how the results play out in the season.
Now, in a moment, we're going to get into the defense, and there's 2 new coordinators there, but more importantly, there's another coach that's going to have a much bigger role on the defense, according to him. We'll get into that in just a moment. Now, if you're looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories, then you got to try a Built Bar. We just got through the holidays, and I know my goal is to eat a little healthier this year. And if you're like me and you're getting ready for St. Patrick's Day, you're going to have a little extra calories with a little bit of that liquid diet. So you want to make sure that you're eating healthy around that. So that's why you got to try Built. With Built, healthy is actually tasty. Seriously, they're so delicious and they're so good for you. It's perfect for those mid-March diets. What makes Built Bars so good? Well, for starters, they're 100% covered in real chocolate. I'm telling you, real chocolate. And the flavors are delicious, including churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond. I'm not sure how they do it, but they only have 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and 17 grams of protein. And now you don't need to just wait around to get a box. You can go to Sam's Club or Walmart. They have them right there. You just walk right over to the pharmacy section. You can get them, or you can head over to built.com and use promo code LOCK15. Again, head on over to those two shops, Walmart or Sam's Club, or go to built.com to get your box of Built today. This is Locked On BC, AJ Black, and we are talking about the defense. Now we talked about the offense. I mean, there is so much change going on with BC, and someone just tweeted me, just press the bubble and everyone gets a new job, and and they have a picture of the trouble game. But the defense has some new names. One of them I have been telling you all along is, if you've been following on Eagle Insider, it is a name that we knew was going to be there. It was Aazaar Abdul. Rahim is going to be a defensive coordinator, and also Sean Duggan, who is a linebackers coach, is also going to be a defensive coordinator. Mitch, let's just talk about those two. There's two other pieces of defensive news we'll get into in just a moment, but let's talk about what your thoughts are on those two hires.
I think promoting Aazaar is the very logical choice. He's one of the team's biggest recruiters. He's been a coordinator before. He's been on a lot of really good staffs across college football. And frankly, I think that if he didn't get this promotion, he was probably going to go be a coordinator somewhere else. Yeah. In terms of Duggan, he's a BC guy. He played for BC a while ago. He's been with Hafley for a decent amount of time. He's kind of one of those rapidly rising names in college football. I think it'll be interesting to see if this season goes well. I wonder, how fast this trajectory is going to be for Duggan. It'd be cool to see him kind of be another Anthony Campanile, where he kind of rockets up the standings of positional coaches and coordinators. But again, this kind of makes sense. I have to imagine Duggan is going to be more of the run if you can call it that, the run defense coordinator. I know some teams have defensive run game coordinators, as he's more of the front seven coach, and then Aazaar will be more of the back seven or secondary coach, will be, designing coverages and all that. So, again, like I think because of the lateness of Lukabu leaving for the Panthers, you probably, again, didn't want to be, bringing in a guy. And this is where Hafley especially said this. He said they didn't want to bring in somebody and have to explain their scheme to them, and then, kind of have this extra level of translation. They figured, let's just promote the guys who know the scheme, who know what we're doing, and that'll make us a better team. And I think on the defense, given the timing of all this, I think that makes probably more sense than it does for the offense, especially given the fact that the defense was slightly better during the course of Hafley's tenure, at least more consistent. So I think I get this one a little more.
And I think one other piece I want to add to this, you did an excellent job of just breaking that down. I thought he gave some really good context on Lukabu leaving, and I honestly don't think it's Hafley blowing smoke. I think it's truth, is that he just wanted to get back to the NFL. And we've seen a lot and heard a lot about coaches getting burnt out in college because of all the recruiting and just the nonstop grind, and that honestly the NFL is a little bit of an easier schedule for them. So I thought that made a lot of sense. I don't know if you.
I totally agree. I think that I think some of those concerns about the coach burnout have been a little overblown. I know some of I think Bud Elliott has talked about that a little bit.
I saw him say,
yeah. But I think the other part, and I'm not sure if I've mentioned this on the podcast, is that the Panthers put together an all-star staff, and a lot of guys made relatively lateral moves. And I think the reason for that is because the Panthers were just throwing out exorbitant amounts of money to get coaches in that building. So I'm sure, Lukabu came to Hafley and said, hey, the Panthers are throwing the bag at me, and I just I don't have to worry about recruiting. I just get to coach football. And he's like, listen, dude, I get it. Go be great, So yeah. I have to respect Lukabu getting out there. And, again, I think that's great for him because he'll be working under Ejiro Evero, who's a rising star as a defensive candidate, and another black coordinator, which, the NFL is struggling to get those guys into bigger positions. So I think that this could be really good for Lukabu's career in the long run.
And so there's two other coaching moves that I think are important. The first one we'll talk about is Paul Rhoads, which was, I think, the biggest surprise. I know the Heights kind of jumped the gun and said he was the new defensive coordinator, and I was able to talk to BC, and they're like, yeah, that's not happening. But he's going to be the outside linebackers coach. I mean, anytime you bring in a coach that has head coaching chops, and I know he wasn't that great at Iowa State, but if I remember correctly, Iowa State had some pretty decent defenses.
Yeah, and this was, and Matt Campbell has kind of raised the profile of Iowa State to where even now the expectations exceed what even Matt Campbell can do. Because I mean, for the longest time, Iowa State was an absolute dumpster fire of a program, and now they're a pretty consistently, decently respected program. And again, Rhoads had I looked at about he had a few good seasons to begin, then it kind of fell off. But I find the designation of outside linebackers very interesting because in the first few years of this team, Hafley's been relatively married to a 4-3 front in, translating that over to nickel, 4-2, what have you. So there isn't a ton of distinction between your outside backers and your inside backers. You're essentially, everybody's just an off-ball linebacker. But I find it interesting that Hafley mentioned in his press conference, doing some more stuff with 3-down linemen, using a nickel Sam. So you're going to see, guys that are more linebacker bodies being out in the slot. So I'm also wondering if this translates to BC just using more 3-4 fronts in general. I think that given the fact that the entire defensive line did a lot of beefing up, or at least according to the spring roster, that you're going to see a lot more odd fronts, 3-down lineman fronts, where the defensive line are asked to essentially do more two gapping, and they have a lot more responsibility to hold the line in run defense, and that allows the more inside linebackers to flow more freely. So I think that on the back end, BC is going to look pretty similar to what they've been doing the last few years. I think if anything, they're going to be even more single high reliant. But I think on the front and in kind of the middle area, the linebacker overhang slot area, I think we're going to see them do a lot of different and interesting things, which I'm really looking forward to that.
I don't see anything wrong with this hire.
No, absolutely not. No.
I think this is a good one. And I know folks have been wondering, like, what was going to be the change? Aazaar is sticking with the secondary, which I think was people were wondering if he was going to be the DC, if he was going to lose that title. He's not. Now, the last coaching change was actually not something that you saw on paper, but it was mentioned in Jeff Hafley's press conference when he said, I'm taking a bigger. So he, first of all, said basically that he's done with dealing with the offense. It sounded like, am I right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
It sounds like Chudzinski's basically the guy for
Chuds and Shimmy.
Chud Shimmy is, or was it called Shimmy Chud?
Yeah. Chud's Shimmy.
Yeah, I'm not going to be going down that road. But he also said, Hafley said, I'm taking a bigger role with this defense. What did that mean to you?
I think I would be very interested, and I'm sure he wouldn't give me a straight answer, but off the record, I'd be very interested to ask Hafley, like, kind of what his involvements were year to year on either side of the ball. But for this year, in terms of his greater involvement on the defense, this kind of plays into them, as I said earlier, playing more single high. If you look at when he was the coordinator for Ohio State in 2019, they used a very unorthodox defense in that and it worked really well because they had such great personnel that they were able to, remain with a 4-3 in the box, and they had 3 corners on the field and they played single high all the time, partially because they had Jordan Fuller at free safety, who is a very good safety for the Rams now. And then their corners were Sean Wade, Jeff Okudah, and Damon Arnett, all of whom are NFL players. So,
yep.
They were able to have this great scheme because they had great players. Now I'm kind of wondering, and based on the bodies they brought in, the kind of new titles and what Jeff Hafley has said, I think that because he is getting more involved, I think like I said, on the back end, you're going to see even BC was already one of the most single high teams in college football. So I'm wondering if he's going to be even more aggressive with that, where you are going to only have 5 to 6 normal traditional box bodies in terms of defensive line and linebackers, but you'll have guys like Kari Johnson and even guys like Sione Hala, Bryce Steele, and Jalen Blackwell being those slot overhangs of guys that can get into the box quickly from the slot and overhang area. So I guess you could say that he is going to be more aggressive with this defense in terms of trying to dictate and confuse the tone of the game to the offense by being more formationally and personnel at least alignment diverse.
All right. Yeah, I was curious because it just seemed like it seems like he's just gonna be. I don't want to say like de facto DC because obviously that's gonna probably be Aazaar, but I wonder how much that role's gonna like how much Aazaar is gonna have Hafley kind of calling shots over him. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly how play calling is going to break down. It's especially weird given that you do have those co-DCs and you have a guy with Paul Rhoads now who has extensive experience as a DC and a head coach. And then, of course, you have Jeff Hafley. So I'm not sure exactly who's going to be the defensive play caller. I wonder if because of that involvement, you're going to see Hafley do that and you're going to see essentially the other guys kind of put the game plan together.
Yep.
Or it could be the way around. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Now, in our final segment, I mean, this we're not even close to being done. There was all sorts of other things that were brought up during the press conference, the roster that came out. Mitch has already brought up some other things. We're going to get into all those little nooks and crannies in just a moment. Locked on BC, this is AJ Black. I am the editor and publisher of Eagle Insider. Mitch is my staff writer. And right now, if you have not done so, we have a spring practice sale on Eagle Insider, 50% off a season, a year-long pass. Basically, you're paying less than a cup of coffee at Starbucks to get full Eagles insight. I have interviews with probably 50 to 60% of the recruits that were on campus this Friday. I have a big board of all the recruits they're going after. These are all source stuff. This is not just me winging it. We have Mitch doing film analysis. We have everything. I'm telling you, we are the top. We are the elite level of BC coverage, and you can join in right now. Make sure you head over to Eagle Insider and sign up. All right, so Mitch, let's look at some of the other things that popped up. I want to get into quickly. We'll just talk about this briefly. The roster changes. There was a few names that were left off, and there was a big one that I was surprised about, which was Jalen Gill, wide receiver. I had talked to a source earlier in the winter, someone close to Jalen, who had said they were not sure what he was going to do yet, and I was hoping he'd be back because I thought he was a good player. You know, he wasn't utilized totally as well as I thought he could have been, but who was last year.
Say somewhat not his fault.
Yeah, but it looks like he's gone. And then the other names that were gone, Finn Durstein, who we saw start till he got hurt. But was he out
3 games? No, he started 3 games.
3 games.
Maybe. I think he started 4 because I think he got hurt during Florida State.
I totally lost track of who played when. For that offensive
That's fair. And again, something Hafley harped upon in the press conference saying yeah, I'm really looking forward to not having to be cycling through different starting combinations on the line every week.
And that was another thing we'll talk about in a second, is his comment to the offensive line, which I thought people can actually breathe about. I thought was good. Spencer Witter, who I thought would be probably one of the top 3 or 4 tight ends on the team, is gone. Mm-hmm. He didn't do much last year, but I think he was hurt. So I don't know. I don't know what's going on there. And then Blair Restemi, who didn't really play.
I think he played. I would be shocked if you told me he played 10 snaps of actual offense, not just special teams. I'd be pretty surprised. But all these guys are, well, I guess Jalen isn't, but the rest of them are Adazio era guys who have just been there for a while and not really meaningfully contributing. Durstein did finally get some reps, but I mean, he was fine, but nothing, exceptional to write home about. But given the rest of the offensive line and who they have, they're listen, this is, I think it would have been his 6th season. So maybe he was just, football isn't for me. I'm hanging it up. And then with Gill, I'm definitely just disappointed that Gill isn't coming back. I'm not sure if he's hitting the portal and going somewhere else or if he's also hanging it up. But I was looking forward to having him as a kind of reliable number 2 or maybe number 3 wide receiver on this offense. So that is disappointing he'll be gone. But I think this gives the chance for a lot of the younger guys to get.
Tomlin, I'd look forward to see what he
can do. Tomlin. I mean, Lewis Bond had some nice flashes early in the year. If Jaden Williams can get back on the out of the doghouse this season, I think that'd be really helpful. And I think I'm eventually going to write about this in kind of an overview of what I expect this offense to be, but a big part of this offense is there's only going to be 2 wide receivers on the field, and that's going to be Ryan O'Keefe and Joseph Griffin. And those guys fit into those, very traditional X and Z or split end and flanker if you're older. They fit those traditional roles very well. I think you're going to see a lot more 2 tight end, maybe even some 2 running back sets from this offense. So that having that third wide receiver be a competition or a split between Williams, Tomlin, Bond, even Tajee Johnson if they want to go heavy, or maybe even one of the younger guys like Ish Zamore or Jaden Skeet. So not terrible losses, but I am disappointed to see Gill not return.
And then the big return actually happened. We saw Christian Mahogany for the first time this spring. He actually talked to the reporters. Hafley says he's not 100% yet. He's not fully practicing yet. He's doing individual stuff, working in film, doing all that good stuff. As he said, Mahogany's been a big deal. And obviously he has a similar story to Zay Flowers in this offseason as other teams were trying to poach him. The NFL was trying to get him. He also mentioned Donovan Nazaraku as another name, and I'd heard some schools, some of the bigger schools, trying to poach him too. But Mahogany staying for another year, and he just like Zay. I love listening to Christian talk. I know we've had him on our show, and he might even be out in the comment section right now because he seems to kind of park himself in some of our comment sections. But I think he's going to be such a huge factor this year.
Yeah, and this was another big thing that Hafley harped on is, obviously last year the offensive line was terrible. You had all these guys cycling in and out, but that does pay dividends the next year because now if one guy goes down, you have a lot of options of guys who can play and you have a lot better competition. So, with Durstein gone now, there isn't as big of a competition, but you expect Kyle Hergel to start at left guard, but you have guys like Conley, like Otto Hess, who got some, or even like Alec and Jackson Ness, who got some playing time, could compete. Even guys like Jude Bowery, who played a little bit of tackle.
Who's up over 300 pounds now. He put
yes,
on like 20.
Very good to see. And then right tackle, I think they kind of expect Logan Taylor to start, given that Kevin Klein's probably still going to be recovering from that ACL tear he suffered early in the season. But, if he's struggling, you can turn to guys like Bowery. I'm not sure of the other guys who might kick out there. I'm not sure about their ability to play tackle, but if later in the season, if Klein is healthy, then maybe, he has some good competition with Taylor, but now you've got depth at pretty much every position where if one of those guys goes down, you can plug in a guy who has played a good bit. And if the rest of the offensive line is better around them, namely with Christian Mahogany back, besides him, you got Kendall and Aazaar Trapilo, returning starters who played most of last year. You've got guys around them that are experienced and they can say like, hey, like we can help you out because the rest of us have at least some semblance of knowing what we're doing, which was not as much the case last year.
And now when we were looking, and we have to kind of wrap things up soon. I've been told I have to keep this under 30 minutes or I get yelled at, is looking at the weights. And you had we had mentioned with Jude Bowery that he's up over 30 pounds, but it was across the board. You had kind of alluded to it with the defense, but I don't know what Phil Matus was doing in the weight rooms with these guys, but it sounds like a lot of guys put on some, and Hafley mentioned it during his press conference. They got big.
Yeah. And that goes back to, and this is again, something that Hafley repeatedly mentions, that this year they really want to run the ball better. And that was something they obviously were the worst at last year. And I think that given Rob Chudzinski's history in the NFL and his coach, the way he coaches and calls an offense, given, again, the fact that they're going to be using heavier personnel in groups 12, 13, 21, 22 even, I think you're going to see this team have a real strong commitment to run the ball, which that ideally should help take some of the pressure off Moorhead's plate and allow him to operate the offense in a more balanced and efficient manner.
All right, Mitch, while I have you, we have a minute and a half left. Thoughts on Zay Flowers in the combine? Go ahead.
Solid combine, good numbers. I know Zay would probably be disappointed that he didn't crack 4.3s, but 4.42 was still pretty good. It was the 9th fastest time of the wide receivers at the combine. Jumps were better than I expected. Pretty solid, 35.5 in the vert, 10'7" in the broad. Pretty good numbers across the board. About average for the group, but solid. Looked really good in positional drills. I think he caught I think he dropped one pass in the gauntlet, but caught every other pass. Unfortunately, he had to work with the worst group of quarterbacks there at the combine this year, and all the reports indicate that he was great in the interviews. So I'm not sure he's gonna be able to be wide receiver 1, but I think that this helped lock him in as a first round pick in the coming draft.
All right, Mitch, we got to head out. So where can people find your work?
You can find me at Mitchell T. Wolfe, WOLFE on Twitter. Now that we're kind of into this dead space between now and the pro day, I'll be having an article come out soon about which teams Zay fits best on, and which teams I think could take him now, ostensibly only in the first round. And then as we get deeper into the spring, especially once we see the spring game, I'll have some more predictions about what I expect this offense to look like in the 2023 season.
So, okay. And just in terms of where we're at, BC football is off practice until the 14th. I think they're on spring break right now. So news will be a little bit quieter, but on tomorrow's show, I will be jumping in to talk about BC basketball again as they prepare for the ACC tournament in a rather easy road, I think, that they drew in that tournament. We'll look at some of the other news going around in terms of BC football, in terms of recruiting. If you have not done so already, please subscribe to our page. Thank you all for listening. For Mitch Wolf, this is AJ Black. Follow me on Twitter at AJ Black _BC. We'll see you again soon. Take care.